definition of the Great Migration generally has already been suggested. The great movement of a mass of black people out of the South, northward and westward, between 1915 and 1960. Some social scientists like to divide that long time period into two smaller periods, of which I'll do this evening. From 1915 to 1930, and then 1940 to 1960. After the Civil War, black folks in the South went into what was almost a cocoon, having to rebuild themselves after such a long period of devastation in slavery. We built our first schools and institutions. We stayed in the South for about 50 years, and then a sign from divine nature woke us up and told us to move. That sign from divine nature was a little pest called the boll weevil. The boll weevil attacked the cotton crops of the South. And with that devastation, black folk having no work began to leave the South. In 1917, the United States entered into World War I, and the conscription of about 5 million mostly white soldiers for the war caused the need for labor, and that labor need caused many more African Americans to migrate. Over 450,000 additional African Americans moved north. After the war in the 1920s, another 800,000 left the South. And between 1940 and 1960, over 3,350,000 left the South. What was the impact of this movement? This movement from the evil of the South transformed African American culture. For the first time, 50 years after the Civil War, African Americans felt free enough for their spirits to come alive. The old down home field songs transformed into the soundtrack of America's roaring 20s. Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, and a host of black musicians transformed American music culture. The Harlem Renaissance, W.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Paul Robeson, Claude McKay, Alan Locke, Marcus Garvey, Zora Neale Hurston, Duke Ellington, and Josephine Baker began to show the genius that had been locked in those black minds all the years that we were in captivity. You Speak was called Black Broadway. Prince Hall Mason's Made Our Stand There. In fact, the movement of blacks from the South to Washington, D.C. greatly expanded the members of our lodges, Corinthian Lodge number 18, Doric Lodge number 19, Fidelity Lodge number 20, all became real during this time period. Plus, our Grand Lodge completed one of its earliest dreams. It completed the building of its own temple there at 10th and U. Then, capitalism fell flat on its face. October 29, 1930. The Great Depression halted everything. Our Grand Lodge even experienced a temporary setback. Then, like they had earlier in the century, the European nations started fighting again. World War II was on. Uncle Sam needed men. Northern factories needed laborers. And the migration was on again. As I said, between 1940 and 1960, an additional 3,350,000 African Americans fanned out from the Black Belt of the South, westward, Denver, Los Angeles, up to Oregon, up to Washington State. They continued to move northward up the Atlantic coast, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, New York City, Boston. With this phase of the migration, America is introduced to the continuing, transforming African American collective soul through the advent of a new age urban African American gospel music and the creation of the gospel highway. Such great acts as the Soul Stirrers, the Alabama Five Blind Boys, impacted African American spirituality. The up-tempo rhythm and blues transformed into soul music. America's segregated society was transformed even further. As Sam Cooke would sing, a change was going to come. This new energy and the death of a teenager from Chicago inspired young college students to form SNCC, to share the baton of leadership with Martin Luther King Jr. Again, with the second half of this migration after World War II, America is introduced to African Americans' collective soul through the advent of rhythm and blues, its white cousin, rock and roll, and then soul music. New age African American gospel. Young white Americans began to express less public hatred toward the laborers who built the foundation of the country. And as we think, 5 years after the official end of the Great Migration, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voters' Rights Act of 1965 were enacted, a new future for African Americans had been secured. Prince Hall's dream had come true. In 1797, in his charge, he looked forward to the day when Africans would become full American citizens. It had finally occurred. And then with people from Shirley Chisholm through Jesse Jackson, all the way to Barack Obama, the African American dream proved to be real as we share in being citizens in this great country. And as you stand down by Martin Luther King's monument near the Potomac River, if you're like me, you can say, I've known rivers. I've known rivers, ancient and dusky rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusty rivers. Our history here in America is a small part of African history. Our history is ancient and deep, like the flowing rivers. Thank you very much.
also pause and say, it's hard for me to see y'all with this light, but y'all look amazing out there, okay? So turn to your neighbor to the left and the right, say, neighbor, you look good. Okay, cool. Come on, black boy. All right, so then we're going to have the introductions of the Right Worshipful. We're going to have introductions by Right Worshipful Deputy Grandmaster Anthony D. Porter.
Good evening. Good evening. Hope you've really enjoyed yourself so far. It has been a beautiful day. It's been a beautiful evening. And how about this wind ensemble? How about the light that we just now received from Worshipful to Hootie Evans? That a lot of us have never heard, but we always needed to know. It is my pleasure to introduce a few that are in the audience today, but if I missed any, please forgive me for I can't see a thing out there. I've seen a few individuals, and I'm going to call them out and just recognize them, but if I miss some, as I said, please just blame it on the fact that I just can't see. Well, all allied heads of allied appended appointed concordant bodies, please rise all in my hands, please. Thank you. Do we have any worshipful masters in the audience with us today? If so, please rise. Thank you, sir. Sirs. All appointed Grand Lodge officers. All elected Grand Lodge officers. Thank you, sirs. We also have with us our Right Worshipful Junior Grand Warden, Alvin Smith. Our Right Worshipful Senior Grand Warden, Glenn Ruffin. And let me see. I hope I got everyone. I'm looking for approval. Okay, it is now my pleasure to bring for his remarks, and it's my pleasure to introduce and to bring from his remarks our most worshipful Grand Master, Quincy G. Gant. Please rise. All the Sonic family, please rise to receive him.
Thank you. Please be seated. You know, if you're back sitting to the audience, you definitely